The Nigerian business sector has been facing myriads of challenges in the last couple of decades. Many businesses have either collapsed, packed up, staggered, and relocated outside the country due to unfavorable conditions. Now, experts have pointed out that unstable policy, lack of necessary infrastructure, insecurity, poor power supply, multiple tax system, lack of transparency, among other factors, depict the country's business environment as unfriendly for investors. Now joining me to discuss this is a business, political and social policy analyst, Kenneth Ikenwa. Thank you so much for joining us at this time, Kenneth.
Thank you for having me on.
All right, so if you could tell us, how would you rate the country's business environment in the last 63 years?
Wow, that would take an entire show or news edition to actually address. But actually, if we look at when we gained independence and from when we became a republic, the Nigerian economy was doing fairly well. We were far heads and above the countries like China, like Singapore, and most of the Asian tigers who actually came to Nigeria to copy our economic model, to take some produce away and took it back to their countries. And they've been able to transform their own countries from third world countries to at least a first world situation. Presently, we have made some gains, no doubt, in terms of infrastructural development and in terms of other indices for development. But I do not think that if we had properly harnessed the human and intellectual capital that we have, we are supposed to be where we are now. So we definitely are in the backwaters of the Committee of Nations, economically, politically, and otherwise. But I dare to say that there is hope.
All right, now you'd agree with me, Kenneth, that there's been a lot of backlash when it comes to government policies. Now, would like you to tell us how these government policies have actually contributed to the present situation, like we've been faced with in Nigeria.
All right, in the last couple of years, let's look at the last two election cycles, or let's take it from the year 1999. We've had a change in government, about 3 to 4 changes in government. And sadly, some of these governments came with good policies, but when new governments and administrations come in, they try to inject new policies that try to represent their own frame of thinking and frame of strategy. That in itself has meant that we have had a lot of policy somersaults that has made it impossible for us to attain economic continuity. And as a result, we find ourselves off the trajectory of growth. And so when we are growing and new policies come, they tend to frustrate the trajectory and the traction that we've made. And this is particularly because most of these policies are not devoid of partisan politics. So the policies are so hydra-headed because we find a lot of political undertone, a lot of cronyism behind some of these policies. So once we can separate the economy and separate that from politics, and also bring about a convergence of politics and economy where it is necessary, we would make the much needed growth and development that we ought to be making as a nation, with the strength of population and with the strength of human and intellectual capital. And with the humongous amount of resources we have, Nigeria should be among the first 20 economies in the world. So there's a need for us to rejig these policies, and there's a need for us to ensure that those who are in charge of policy formulation at the economic level, at the economic institutions, are basically non-partisan in their approach to politics. That will help the situation.
All rightly said, Kenneth. Now, you'd agree with me that small businesses are the bedrock of, an economy. Now, but in recent years, a lot of businesses have suffered. We've seen companies have either folded up or even left Nigeria for other African countries, citing harsh business environments. Now, what are these countries doing right, and what are the implications for Nigeria?
Well, that takes us back to 1963, where the likes of Malaysia, Singapore came to Nigeria to look at what we were doing right and went and replicated that in their countries. Basically, what some of these countries have done right is to put the necessary infrastructure that is accommodative of investment and policies that are people-centered in place. Now, when such policies and such infrastructure are in place, What it helps to do is to reduce the level of volatility and exposure of the economy, protect the home country, and then reduces the level of uncertainty in those economies. So why many companies are quick and fast about leaving Nigeria and relocating to even neighboring countries in West Africa? It's because the degree of volatility in such countries is quite low, and the uncertainty in those environments are quite low. And where there is a high level of volatility and uncertainty, there will be a high degree of complexity. So if the present administration can work on these exposures, especially the exchange rate exposures, especially the deep level of corruption that affects policy implementation and policy formulation, we will be able to attract these companies back and stimulate our local industries and stimulate the small and medium scale subsector in Nigeria. And then we can kickstart the economy for the appropriate direction in the path of economic growth and economic development. That is what we need to do. We need to be bold about these issues, and we need to be courageous in policy implementation, removing the people on board and on ship that make these problems more complex, and bringing the right people in place. That will take us to the promised land that we very much are hopeful of in this dispensation.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Kenneth Ikenwa, for your time. I really wish we had more time to talk about this.
Thank you very much for having me on.